Hey everyone, yes, I am a fighter pilot, once and always, but I'm also a test pilot, and that means I've seen and done things with airplanes you can't even imagine. That also means I've met some amazing pilots with equally amazing stories along the way. Stories of combat, stories of saving lives, women aviators, astronauts, the list goes on and on. I'll give you unprecedented access to this arena like you've never seen before. I'm your host, Brett Vance, and this is Jet Jockeys.
The signals are there. And listen, we know that this shot can produce myocarditis.
Yeah.
And the problem with myocarditis is it can be subclinical. And so if a pilot is diagnosed with myocarditis, that's a career ender.
Yeah.
The pilot is not allowed to be issued a medical certificate because, there could be the possibility of sudden cardiac failure. So it's a hard line in the sand, and it's a safety issue, you see. Wow. So again, as I said, pilots are trained for this type of scenario where the pilot loses consciousness or even dies. We're trained for that. But what I'm saying is a more dangerous thing could be a sudden control input from a pilot because of a seizure. And we've had reports of seizures now that are starting to happen to pilots in the cockpit. Now, luckily, it hasn't caused, a flight control input that was unexpected. But I can tell you, Jonathan, in 33 years of flying, I can tell you that if there is an unexpected control input that's put into an aircraft, particularly on the rudder pedals. In other words, if this pilot has what's called a tonic seizure, where the leg goes completely stiff and pushes that rudder pedal clearly all the way to the floor, a full deflection of that flight control, and that leg locks, there's no way that other pilot is going to be able to overcome that. If this happens during takeoff, the aircraft will leave the runway. It could hit another aircraft. There will be damage, and there could be people that are either seriously hurt or die over this. The same thing could happen on the landing phase. If a control input is put in like that, that's unexpected, and the other pilot cannot overcome that control input, you're going to have a possible disaster.
How was that for a cold open? How many of you knew all that was happening in commercial aviation? Hey everyone, our country is at a severe inflection point in the aviation industry and also in the culture itself. We take the wrong turn and the consequences may be unrecoverable. We maintain aircraft control, analyze the situation, and take the proper action, and we can recover this unusual attitude. Aviators, you know what I mean. I'm excited to have as our guest today on Jet Jockeys, Captain and Dr. Kevin Stillwagon. Like so many professional aviators, Dr. Stillwagon always wanted to be a pilot and started flying at the age of 15. But at the same time, he also decided to follow in his father's medical footsteps and became a chiropractor. He developed an intense interest in the dangers of vaccines and published a book on the topic in the 1980s. Since then, he has become a medical freedom fighter. As you might remember, in 2020, it looked like we had come under threat from our government and employers regarding various COVID mandates. And in 2021, that threat became very real. The term jab or job became a common description for so many policies that caused the loss of freedom and livelihoods. I had my own career as a test pilot cut short that year because I refused the president's mandate for the gene therapy shot. And this is where my story and Kevin's story began to look the same. It became clear to Kevin that the loss of freedom because of COVID mandates would be worse than the virus itself. In this episode, you'll learn the vector we took to this inflection point, the problems we're having, and of course, some solutions. This episode will be an excellent ongoing resource for you, and that's our objective. I'm your host, Brett Vance, and this is Jet Jockeys.
All right, here we go. Captain Dr. Kevin Stillwagon, thanks for coming on Jet Jockeys. I've been looking forward to this for a long time because we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we do.
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, a lot of this is going to be fun, and some of it's going to be a little scary.
Yeah. I have to agree with you. I've done some of the things that we're going to talk about. I've been talking to civic groups for a while now, like over a year, and they have interesting reactions, and we're going to
Yeah.
talk about some of that too. But first, I think one of the neatest things that our audience likes to hear about when it comes to a guest here on Jet Jockeys is, and because of their interest in aviation, is how in the world did you get started in aviation? So, big picture, how old were you? Where were you at? What were you doing when you decided to
Yeah.
become a pilot? Tell me that story.
Well, this is something that I just inherently knew, even as a child in grade school. I was attracted to all things jets and aviation.
Yeah.
My father was a chiropractor. He did a lot of traveling for his work. And so my mother would drag me, the oldest of four boys, out to the Greater Pittsburgh International Airport. And this was, decades ago, the old airport where they had an observation deck. And so we
Oh,
could actually stand on the observation deck. And this was before jetways even, Brett.
right.
People had to walk across the tarmac carrying their luggage. And, to me, it was romantic. I mean, just standing on that
Yeah.
observation deck, almost close enough to touch the airplanes. And, I would see those pilots in the cockpit and I'm like, man, I want that. I want
Ah,
that to be part of my life. It was just, I fell in love with it. And, my little brothers are up there and I'm like, aren't you excited about this? They're like, no, it's noisy. It's smelly. But, for me, I was just absolutely attracted. And so, my mother picked up on that and she actually bought me, uh, a United States Air Force uniform for a child. And I almost never
yes.
took that thing off. It had the USAF insignia on it. And I started building models. My favorite
Same here.
jet was and I'm sure you'll remember this one, it was the Convair B-58 Hustler.
Right.
Mean looking Delta Wing aircraft with big four honking engines on that thing. And it could go Mach 2. And that thing was commissioned in 1960, and they flew that thing in active duty until 1970. And so this was when I was a kid,
Nice.
and I was just enamored with that airplane. So I built the model, and I can remember driving down the highway and sitting in the back seat of the car with the window open, hanging on to
Of
that
course.
model jet, out the window, making it climb and descend, and picture myself being in the cockpit of that thing. And
And did you
so
have it tethered to your arm by any chance?
I just made
No.
sure that I held on tight, because,
Right.
oh my God, so much fun as a kid. And then, my father, he always had an interest in aviation as well. And so when I was about 15 years old, my father decided that he wanted to take up aviation as a hobby. So he went to the local airport and started taking flying lessons in a little Cessna 150. And after he got soloed, and he got his private pilot's license, then I started to ride along with him. And then I was just absolutely captured, and I started to study things on my own. I can remember listening to old
Yeah.
audio tapes called "Let's Go Flying with Bob Bourgeot," and I would lay out sectional charts on my bedroom floor, and I would follow along with him as he would teach me how to do dead
Nice.
reckoning and drawing the lines and learning about VORs and navigation. And so, I was learning about this stuff even before I was legally of age to fly. And so,
Perfect. Yeah, of
and then I
course.
started I started taking lessons, and I mean, I just absolutely latched on, and I just had the skills, and it was natural for me. And I soloed when I was 16 years old and got all of my
Yes.
licenses at minimum age. And Brett, I was so in love with aviation that I would do crazy things like riding my bicycle down the road, and I would see a manhole cover, and I would say, "Okay, that's a navigational fix." And now air traffic control is going to give me instructions to hold over that manhole. And so I would practice holding pattern entries, and I would sit in my backyard with a radio that was capable of picking up aviation frequencies. And I was
Nice.
close enough to an
Nice.
airport where I could hear the control tower talking to the pilots. And I could hear, even center, Pittsburgh Center. I could pick up on some of those
About that.
transmissions, even from aircraft at high altitudes. And so I learned the lingo, I learned the language. I mean, I was way ahead of the game. And, then I got my instructor's rating and I started teaching people how to fly. And I just knew deep down in my soul that I was going to be an airline pilot, not just a pilot, an airline pilot. And I had the book that was called How to Become an Airline Pilot. And I read that thing cover to cover many, many times. And I can remember even when I was in junior high and high school, people are like, well, what do you want to be? And I said, I'm going to be a flying chiropractor, because my father was a chiropractor, of course, and he wanted me to become a chiropractor. And I figured I could do both. I am going to do both. And they said, well, you can't do that. And, this is long before the phrase hold my beer, but hold my beer because
we're definitely going to get to that here in just a second. That's for sure. What about, because your path was probably, I would think, pretty common for some of those of us who actually wanted to get up into the aviation business. Because when you were little, and I knew at the same time, I knew it when I was probably about 7 years old, that I wanted to be a pilot. And similar things, living near airports and all that fun stuff that our parents kind of exposed us to, which was great.
Right.
So a lot of people might be watching right now that want to do this. So what advice would you give people now? Things are way different now than when we came through.
Yeah. So, I would encourage anybody, kids that are watching this, and even adults, even if you're in your 20s and 30s and you're not happy with your current career, you can make the change. You can do this. You can become a professional pilot. You just got to make a plan and work your plan. Now, you mentioned something really important, Brett, and that is the love of aviation. We need more people to get in aviation that absolutely want to be in aviation and love it. And they are willing to put in the hard work and energy that it takes to get there. Unfortunately, we're in a situation today where some airlines are so needing pilots that they're putting these accelerated programs together where people can pay a whole lot of money and get put into an accelerated track. And then all of a sudden they find themselves in the cockpit of a passenger carrying aircraft. And, to me, this is really not the safe way to do it. And I got to see some of this firsthand, Brett. One of my first airlines that I worked for in the capacity of a captain was Northwest Airlines. And we'll talk about the path of how I got there. But I can tell you that at Northwest Airlines, they had this test program where they were going to take employees from other areas of the company, like baggage handlers, flight attendants, reservationists, anybody who had a true interest in becoming a pilot. They were going to put them through an accelerated program and get them in the cockpit. And as a captain, I got to fly with a couple of these people and evaluate them. And I want to tell you, Brett, it was not pretty. These people, although they had the technical skills, they could program the aircraft to fly from point A to point B, and, they understood all of the technology. When it came down to basic seat of the pants flying, they didn't have those skills. Because I would have them, click off the autopilot, click off all automation, and say, okay, there's the runway, put her down. And they're like, I can't. I need to be lined up with the runway. I need vectors. I need to have the automation on. I need the autopilot. I'm like, okay, this is not good. And I wasn't the only one that reported this back to the company. That this is really not the way that we need to be going. When you're flying a passenger aircraft as a crew member, as a passenger, you want those crew members up front to be as highly trained and as experienced as they can possibly be.
Yeah.
And you get that experience like I did and like you did. You go through what's called paying your dues, and you fly
Hmm.
little airplanes for hours and hours and hours, and you get scared. You scare yourself because you end up putting yourself in situations that, thinking back upon them today, as like, man,
Yeah.
I would
How
never,
did I do
would
that?
never, never have done that. But you do those things, and you gain the experience. And these are the things that you carry with you through the rest of your career, and that
Yeah.
helps you to
I
become
think you're right too, because I think I flew for over 20 years as an Air Force pilot before I got into the airlines. And you're
right.
absolutely right. The it's easy enough going through a syllabus to
Yeah,
develop the technical skills that you need. Can I
exactly.
program the FMS? Can I make the heads-up display work? Can I
Yeah,
make all of this stuff in front of me and all these buttons overhead? Do I know what they all do? Yeah, sure. But then when it comes to the judgment that years of experience brings, that's
yeah.
where it's tough. And I
That's
think
what.
too that's where one of the responsibilities of being a flight instructor, because in the military and also in the civilian world, I was a flight instructor like you for forever.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things we try to do for our students is kind of pour some of our own experience into them, because it's going to take them a while to gain it. So anything you can do to help is
Yeah.
going to be a big deal to get them up to speed. I actually did the same thing as you did, flying with people who paid money to get
Hmm.
some flying time, not
Hmm.
really experience, but just some flying
Right.
time. And I think my observation was about the same as yours. I
Yeah.
saw the people were able to, manipulate the controls, were able to
Yeah.
do things with the airplane, land it. But as
Hmm.
far as the judgment was concerned, just aeronautical decision making, not so much.
Yeah, that's something that you really have to gain with lots and lots of hours of flying in different types of airspace, different, traffic
Right.
congested airspaces. Some of these people have never experienced that. And when you get thrown into it, as you said, you can make the automation work, and you can hang in there. But when things start to go wrong, and they
Yeah.
do, and I'm sure you've heard this this saying that aviation is hours and hours and hours of boredom interspersed with a few seconds of stark terror.
That's what we
And
say about the flight test business. Same kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's
so when
absolutely right.
those terrifying moments come, you want somebody in
Yeah.
that seat and in command that is really going to be calm, cool, and collected, and is able to handle it properly. Yeah.
You kind of made me laugh there with one of the things you were saying about people with not that much experience, but that they can, operate the airplane. When
Yeah.
you're going into Class B airspace for the first time and the radios are just going like crazy,
Oh yeah.
and then woe be unto you landing at LAX or
Oh
Chicago or
yeah.
something like that,
It
trying to
puts
get your words in edgewise on the mic.
yeah
Good
it
luck.
it puts the fear of God in you the first time you do
Yeah.
that. And you brought up another interesting point about the culture of this.
Hmm.
There have been a few airline executives over the years that truly think that it's safe to have pilots that are basically trained to proficiency, and they will try to cut costs and cut safety measures, do anything they can for the
Yeah.
bottom line, just the bottom line of the airline, for the airline to be profitable and make a lot of money, thinking that we can basically put anybody up there that's willing to go there. And again, this
Yeah.
is not where we need to be.
I had that same experience when I was at Delta 2. It was always train to proficiency. You passed all the objectives, get out of the box. So you're
Yeah.
finished for now. So
Hmm.
not a great way to do business, certainly
No.
from a safety standpoint. Like you said, if nothing goes wrong, you're fine. But the
Yeah.
second anything goes wrong, and we might talk about that a little bit later about handling emergency procedures. I'm sure you and I both had more than our share.
Oh yeah.
But so your path from private pilot to ATP, because
Yeah.
that's the first step.
Hmm.
How did you do that part?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up because I had a major obstacle in getting into the airlines because of my vision. I did not have perfect, uncorrected 20/20 vision. And back in the day when I was trying to, break into the airlines, no airline would hire a pilot. Maybe a couple of smaller airlines, but the big ones that I really wanted to go with, you had to have perfect, uncorrected 20/20 vision. I didn't have that. But I knew that somehow there was going to be a way to break through that barrier. Either they would drop the requirement or there was something that I could do. Well, I did find something, and that was a procedure that was called orthokeratology. And basically, you would wear hard contact lenses, and they would change the shape of your cornea so that you could see 20/20 past the vision test and get an unrestricted first class physical. And so I did that. And as soon as I accomplished that, then I went out and I got the training for my ATP license. And you can do that in a small aircraft. You just need to.
I did.
Yeah. You get your ATP in a small aircraft. It's just another rating that you add on to your certificate. Doesn't have anything to do with the size of the airplane. Well, now, in order to get hired by an airline, now you have to build the hours in larger aircraft, particularly aircraft that are powered by turbine engines. And so I knew I had to make this happen. And so while I was going through this phase, I was practicing as a chiropractor in the office. And so how do you do both? Well, that was challenging. And what I was doing was I was flying freight at night in turbine aircraft all night long. So I would work in the office all day. I would drive out to the airport. I would literally take off at about 10:30 at night. And I would fly all over the East Coast and get back in the morning at like 5:30, 6 o'clock. I would drive home. I would try to sleep for 4 hours and then back in the office. And that's how I gained the experience. You know what? That was hard. And that's what I call paying your dues. But I had the burning desire to make this happen, Brett. I just felt that I had to do this. And so, then I started putting out applications to be hired by airlines. I interviewed at American, and I didn't make it past the physical on that one for some reason. It may have had something to do with my family background, because they really wanted to know everything. How many people in your family have died of cancer, of heart problems, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe there was something there that they didn't like. I don't know. I was healthy, but maybe they just didn't like certain signs that they saw in my family. Who knows? I also interviewed with United Airlines, and I made it through the entire process. And I was at the final board interview, and I really thought I had the job, Brett. But there was one person in personnel that didn't like my history of driving. I had a couple of I had a couple of speeding tickets back in the day, and they didn't like that. So I didn't make it through that one. So, the airline that finally did pick up on me was Eastern Airlines. And this was in 1987. And this was when Frank Lorenzo had taken over Eastern Airlines. And we kind of alluded to that about certain, airline CEOs thinking that, the way to do business is to cut costs and cut corners, and this affects safety. Well, he was one of those guys. So anyway, I did get hired by Eastern, and I can remember going into flight ops on my very first day for my very first assignment, and there was a captain who sees me in my uniform, and he knew immediately that I was a new hire because
new guy.
They gave us wings that weren't full wings. They were half wings until you made it off probation. And so he looked at me, he said, "Son, did your mother drop you on your head when you were a child? What are you doing at this dump of an airline?" And I said, "Sir," I said, "I have been trying to get hired by any airline I could for the experience." And I said, "I know what situation this airline is in. I know that. but I said, I'm here for the experience.
I don't care.
This is probably going to be a stepping stone for me. And, it turned out to be a stepping stone because 2 years later, Brett, on March the 3rd at midnight, 1989, we went on strike, and I was in the cockpit at midnight. And I can remember packing my bag and walking off the flight deck at midnight, knowing that I would never be back in the cockpit of an Eastern jet ever again. And that's when I, was out of work and, trying to get on with other airlines. And I eventually did. And that was a rocky road. It went from Comair, which was a Delta connection carrier,
I remember that,
to Northwest Airlines. And then Northwest Airlines merged with Delta. And then that's kind of how I got there. So yeah, it was a rocky road, but well worth it. And I've got a lot of great memories, man. We can talk about some of the experiences that I've had, and they are just absolutely memorable. Yeah,
absolutely. I can attest to the memories that I had. I got on with Delta pretty much the same time in the early 2000s. That a lot of people were getting on right at the peak. And then after that, we had the bankruptcies and same thing. Airline CEOs trying to shrink to profitability.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't work.
No.
Took my share of the furlough. And the rest is history. Show's not about me. Show's about you. So we're going to take a little quick break here. And I'm going to go ahead and show a video about Kevin's first airplane. He, like thousands of other people, flew the Cessna 172. And that was one of my first airplanes, too, for initial pilot training, although the Air Force trained me after the Air Force Academy. But my first flights, just out of high school, as a senior in high school, were in the Cessna 172. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and show that video now. Kevin, you were talking a little bit earlier about being a captain at Delta. How did your experience as a new guy, brand new first officer, maybe even second officer, for a while I was a second officer for a few months at Delta myself, running sideways before I got to look out the front windows. But how was your upgrade to captain? Well, when did you decide to make your first captain's bid? What airplane did you get out of training?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my start in the airlines was at Eastern Airlines, and I rode sideways like you did, Brett. And boy, I can remember that, continuing on my story that first day of showing up for work, and the captain kind of chastising me a little bit. But I can remember rolling down the runway and doing my job as the second officer, monitoring everything on my panel, setting the power for takeoff. And I'm thinking, man, I'm really here. I'm really doing this. And, I did it in the simulator, but the very first time you feel that nose wheel come off that runway and you see and you feel that deck angle from the cockpit. I mean, you don't experience that in the back of the airplane. I mean, it is just absolutely fascinating. And the power. And it's really, I mean, you just never get over that. And so I rode sideways at Eastern the whole time I was there. And then when I went
how long was that? How many years did you fly sideways?
That was 2 years.
Oh,
that was 2 years. And then my next airline was Comair. And I can remember driving to the Comair headquarters that was at the Orlando International Airport, literally begging for a job because I had been out of work for a week.
A week?
Not a week. I'd been out of work for a year.
Yeah, for sure.
I had no desire to go. Yeah, I didn't want to go back into chiropractic. I had let my license lapse, and I just wanted to stay in the cockpit. That was my true love, my true desire. And so, I begged for a job at Comair. I told management there, I said, look, if somebody that you have hired doesn't show up for class, I'm fully qualified. I'm an ex-Eastern pilot. I'm ready to go. Call me. I'll be here in a moment's notice. And so that's what happened.
Whoa.
Somebody didn't show up for class. Yeah. And so I was able to get flying at Comair, and I was a first officer on the Brasilia, which is a 23 passenger, I believe it was, turbine aircraft. And so I did that for 4 years. And while I was there, I was approached by my neighbor who was a mechanic for Northwest Airlines. And this is a great story, Brett. He said, are you happy, flying those little airplanes around? I said, no, man. I said, I want to fly, the heavy iron. And he's like, well, I got an application here for a pilot for Northwest Airlines. And he said, they are going to start hiring again. They haven't hired for a number of years. He said, so fill it out, have it ready to go, but don't send it in until I tell you. So I did that. And then several weeks later, he calls me and he says, you got that application ready to go? I said, yeah, I do. He said, all right, I want you to mail it overnight to this address. And I did. Sent it to Minneapolis. And literally within the week, I got a call from Northwest Airlines asking me to come up for an interview. And so I went up there for the interview, and literally, Brett, I was the first pilot to interview at Northwest Airlines in over 4 years. 4 years.
Nice.
And so I got right on the leading edge of a major hiring wave. And so things were fast and furious, man. I got retrained as a flight engineer on the Boeing 727, and I did that for about a year. And then I was able to move into the right seat of the Airbus A320, and I did that for 4 years. And so in my 5th year of being at Northwest Airlines, I was eligible for an upgrade to captain on the DC-9.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So
old school.
fast.
The steam. Oh, it was so fast. It was really fast. And, so coming from the right seat of the Airbus, which is, fly-by-wire and highly technical and glass cockpit and, everything is automated, back to the DC-9, which is
not
all steam. No automation. None
it's whatsoever. Steam coming out of the
gauges. Yes. It's really the true historical flying.
Right.
These airplanes were built in the 1960s. And so I went through that training, and it was rigorous, and I studied hard, and believe me, it was a lot of work. And I can remember the first time that I was in the left seat, and the instructor sitting back there watching me, and coming off the side stick, and then grabbing a hold of the flight controls, and I was kind of overreacting. He goes, son, what are you doing up there, milking a cow?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a learning curve, but some of my funnest times as being a captain was a captain on that DC-9, because it was true, down to earth, old school flying, and I really enjoyed that a lot, really a lot. Yeah.
A lot of technical differences between that and the Airbus, and even some of the later Boeing jets too, going from a side stick controller, fly-by-wire, back to the DC-9.
And so then, while I was a captain on that thing, and I got my captain upgrade, I think in 1999, and then what happened? There was 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
And that was a significant change to the industry, and I lost my captain's seat So I had to go back to the right seat of the Airbus for a while. And then I also had the opportunity to fly right seat on the DC-10, the wide body international aircraft. And so, I got a taste of international flying. Did a lot of flying from Seattle nonstop to Amsterdam. Man, that's a long flight, Brett, because they're very close to the North Pole, and saw a lot of interesting sights up there. In fact, I actually got to fly inside of the Aurora Borealis, and man, that was just something that was absolutely unforgettable. I wish I would have had a camera to take a picture of it, but I didn't. And this was before, smartphones.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we had cell phones, but they didn't have cameras on them. So, but it was just beauty, absolutely indescribable. So, yeah, that's a really great memory that I have right there. And another good memory that I have. This is another good one. It was a flight from Washington International Airport, DCA, which has very short runways, as you know. And this is when I was back in the right seat of the Airbus, and we had, as a passenger, we had Senator Oberstar, who was very, very instrumental in getting some significant safety changes made at the FAA. I'm sure you remember that. And this was after a horrific accident that happened, and he wanted some significant changes put in there. And he was able to make that happen, which is a very, very good thing. And so we're getting ready to fly this thing, and another passenger was Richard Anderson, who at the time was the CEO of Northwest Airlines. And he wanted to ride in the cockpit with us. Sure. And he's allowed to do that. He's allowed to do that as the CEO. The captain was a little reluctant to do that, but I said, Captain, this is our one and only opportunity to really nail this guy down on some things. Let's do it. He said, okay, we'll do that. So I'll try to keep this story short, but it's blizzarding outside, and the temperature is like 16 degrees. Nice. The snow is blowing. Richard Anderson is sitting there in the cockpit with us, watching us go through everything that you need to do to get a passenger jet safely airborne in the middle of a blizzard, which has a lot to do with, de-icing the wings and the tail. Yeah, we had to de-ice, and so we're coming up on what's called a holdover time, meaning that you either got to go back and de-ice or you got to take off. And so we're next in line for takeoff, and the tower is calling us and saying, "You're next in line for takeoff, but we got a question for you." What's that? Do you have Senator Oberstar aboard? Yes, we do. And they said, well, we have a change to your clearance when you're ready to copy. I said, ready to copy. And the change in clearance was, after airborne, you are cleared direct to the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, which was our destination. So they knew that he was on board that aircraft. And, when you got somebody with that much clout as a passenger, things happen. So we get cleared to take off, and I mean it's really, really nasty outside. In fact, the captain was questioning whether we were safe to take off or not because the runway was covered in snow. And so we made the determination that although it was covered in snow, the runway was not contaminated. If the runway is contaminated, then it's not safe to take off. It was dry snow. So the runway was considered to be slippery. And, Richard Anderson is sitting here watching us go through all of this stuff. And, we make the determination that, it's safe to go. So we roll down the runway, and we're taking off in the middle of a blizzard. And sure enough, as soon as we become airborne and the captain calls for gear up, we had a cockpit emergency. Lights started going off in the cockpit. It turned out to be nothing significant. It was a problem with one of the wing de-icing valves, but it still makes bells and whistles and lights go off. And so the captain says to me, he says, "You have the aircraft and air traffic control. I will handle the emergency." Roger, Captain. So he goes
standard way of splitting the cockpit.
Exactly. And Richard Anderson is sitting there watching us do all of this. So 5 minutes later, we're on top of the clouds now. We're in the clear. The emergency has been resolved, and the captain's ready to come back into the loop. So I brief the captain on who we're talking to and where we are. And then I turned around and I looked at Richard Anderson sitting on the jump seat, and I looked at the captain and I said, "Captain, do they really pay us enough to do this?"
Oh, yes.
And Richard Anderson jumped in right away. He said, "Man," he said, "I watched you guys." He said, "I have a lot of respect for everything you guys do in the cockpit." And he said, my goal is to have you guys be the highest paid airlines in the industry." Yep. And so it was like a high five to the captain on that, because, money's not everything, but, you deserve to be paid. Yeah. When you have a job like that, where you have so many lives at risk at one time. And people don't think about that too much, but it's really a critical job.
Yeah. When nothing happens and everything is nice and quiet in the cockpit, anybody can do it. But when the bells and whistles start going off, that's when you need the experience. Yeah,
it's like a doctor, a surgeon. People have a lot of respect for surgeons. I do too. I mean, they do great work. But how many people are at risk at one time when you're under the knife? Yeah. One. How many people are at risk when you're in the cockpit of an airliner and you've got a critical situation to deal with? You see the difference?
One of those things is, not only do you have the people on your airplane, but if you don't do it right, you've got people on the ground where all those parts are going to hit.
Oh, yeah.
So there's more to it than just you.
We can talk. No, there's a lot more involved in this. And I'm still amazed even to this day that any airplane can get airborne on time with all of the things that need to be done, all of the safety checks that need to be happen. And, this is all going on behind the scenes. Brett, you and I know this, but passengers don't know. They don't think
ignorance
about it.
Is bliss.
But, that airplane is scrutinized constantly. And, there are mechanics that are looking at that thing between flights. Either the captain or the first officer is required to do a cursory pre-flight before each and every flight. I mean, it's that big of a deal. To look for something that's loose or something that might be leaking. And, airplanes aren't perfect. Things break. And so we have we have a big, thick manual in the cockpit. I mean, it's thick. It's like 4 inches thick, and it's called the minimum equipment list. And so when something breaks on the aircraft, then you consult the MEL or the MEL, as we sometimes called it, to see if you were safe enough to operate the flight. And so with the redundancies that there are on aircraft, you can have things that are broken, and sometimes major things, even things like generators that can be broken and put on a deferral list, and you can safely operate the aircraft for a certain number of hours, a certain number of landings, until that part is fixed or replaced.
One of the write-ups
it's all in the,
one of the write-ups that I didn't like to see was autopilot failure. What? I got to take this thing without an autopilot?
Well, I can remember, this is a flashback that just hit me, years ago at Eastern, when things were really dismal and, maintenance was delayed, almost nothing got fixed. We would say as pilots to each other that airplane has the measles. Yeah. Because when you walk into the cockpit, everything that was on MEL had a red dot. And so you would watch the airplane, you see all these red dots. Oh my God, this airplane has the measles. And so then you got to take extra time to look up everything that's broken and, make sure that you're within the time parameters. And all in the name of safety, and it was still safe to do that. But, there has to be hard lines in the sand for safety.
Yeah.
And there are some hard lines, but unfortunately, some of those lines are being broken.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that extensively here in a few minutes. That's for sure. You said me something really funny about one of your experiences. Actually, you probably had this experience several times. Flying charters and some of the cool food. What kind of experiences did you have flying charters? Did you know that your assignment that day was going to be a charter flight, or did you volunteer for them? How'd that work there at Delta?
Well, it was both ways. You could either volunteer for the charter flights, or you could be assigned a charter flight out of the blue. And this is an entirely different operating experience because you're no longer what's called a scheduled carrier. Now you're under a different regulation, which is Part 135. It's much more relaxed. Once you're up at altitude, you can open the cockpit door and the players can come up and visit the cockpit if they want to, and you can talk to it's much, much more relaxed. But listen, they cater to these guys. And I mean, the food is incredible. I mean, they cater this airplane with prawns as big as your fist, and gourmet food and filet mignon. I'm not kidding you. And clam chowder if you're flying out of Boston, which I did many times. So we got to experience that as being in the cockpit because, hey, you get hungry up there and you're allowed to partake in some of these things. And the flight attendants are specially trained to be on these charter flights. They have to have extra good people skills. And it's just a fun experience. Oh my gosh. I got some great memories there.
Oh, bet.
And you get to fly into some airports too that you don't normally get to fly into because they want these guys, shuffled through an airport quickly. And so it's not going to be an international airport. It's going to be, a smaller local airport with runways long enough to handle a big jet. But man, it's fun to come roaring up in a jet on a private
airport
ramp. They're wanding you in. And you got this 200,000-pound aircraft, and sitting around you are all these small airplanes and pilots looking at you.
Could be the first time the line guy has marshaled in a big airplane like that. That's fun.
Exactly.
That's fun.
Exactly.
Well, another part of your life, and this is fascinating to me as a military fighter pilot. I've known about a handful, I think, of doctors and these world flight surgeons that ended up getting their wings. Mm-hmm. So I've known a few of those kind of folks, but not that many. And it's nice to add you to that list of flying doctors. And you're fully qualified in the medical profession, fully qualified as a pilot.
Right.
So how did that happen for you fit that part of your life? You mentioned that your father was an inspiration for that. So how did it happen that you became licensed?
Well, it was kind of a challenge to do both,
right?
But it's doable. It's doable. There's two ways to do it, and I was targeting the first way, which is to get hired by an airline that is close to where you live, and if you do that, then you can put yourself on what's called reserve status, which means you don't fly until they need you to fly. And so you can be in the office doing your thing. And if the phone rings and it's the airline and they need you for a flight, then you put your patients, you cancel them for the next day or two or whatever it takes. And, as a chiropractor, it's not an emergency. Mainly my clientele that I was working with was just maintenance of spinal and joint health, basically. So there's no emergencies. I could cancel appointments and go fly. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to what's called bid down your schedule. And that's what I ended up doing. So I would get a full schedule at the start of the month, which would be like 3 5-day trips. So that's 15 days of flying. and I would bid those down to 1-day trips. So I would fly 3 days a month instead of 15 days out of the month. Now you got paid less, but that's how you would do it if you wanted to have 2 careers.
Right.
And I met lots of pilots that were doing that. I
Me
met
too.
attorneys, some dentists. There was one other chiropractor that I ran into that was doing that. Didn't run into any medical doctors, but they're out there, as you said. They are out. Yeah. So having a dual career, although it's challenging, it's not entirely unique. And so I was definitely able to do that.
You were fully committed to both, obviously.
Yeah.
Because one of the things you mentioned in your bio that I thought was really interesting was that medical device that you had been in. That thing, even to this day, that thing is still in use in some places in the world. Just tell me briefly about that.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Yeah, so just real briefly, my father was one of the pioneers in the profession, and he, with a colleague, had developed an instrument that chiropractors use for temperature sensing along the spine, and they had developed that back in the 1960s. And after I got out of college and started practicing, and I was using that device, I came up with a way to improve the device by computerizing it and making an image on a computer screen instead of just a little graph that this instrument would spit out. So I thought that this would give us more information about heat patterns along the spine. And indeed it did. And so my father and I worked on that together, and we were able to invent this machine. I had some computer programming skills that I had learned as an elective in college. Yeah. And so I was able to program the device, and we hired an engineer to actually, assemble the thing and put it together and make it all work. But cool. Yeah, that was something that happened in the mid '80s, and that was exciting as well. And my father and I did a lot of traveling during that time, and we actually did it in a small airplane that I became part owners in. It was called a Cessna Skymaster. Sure. And in the military, it's called an O2. Yeah. That's the old engine in the front, engine in the back, mix master, push me, pull me thing. Yep. And so he and I traveled a lot together, in that small airplane.
That's just, really neat that you had 2 careers that I think are probably some of the most significant regarding technology. You're in the medical field, and here you are flying airplanes. Some of the most technological things that we make. So that is pretty neat that you were deep into both of those. You mentioned some time conflicts that you had, but it looks like you were able to manage those fairly well. And I encourage people that are watching this episode of Jockeys today that you may think you're busy, but we are all busy. And anything worth doing right, you've got to be able to devote the time to it and manage that time, and also set aside the time that you need. We were talking earlier about going to initial pilot training. I think one of the most important things for a newbie pilot is to be able to devote the time that they need to get their upgrades. So if you can go to a flying lesson maybe once a week, that's great. Much less than that, a couple times a month, you're going to spend half of the whole next lesson relearning everything you learned a couple weeks ago. And it just, it's a lot more expensive.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Brett. And, when I went to chiropractic college, I mean, that takes a lot of time, but I still stayed involved in aviation. I joined a flying club at the Moline International Airport, which was very nearby the college that I went to, and I became an instructor for them.
Perfect.
And I would check out their pilots on all of the different aircraft that they had, and there were many different types of Cessnas and Moonies and Pipers, and so I was always involved in aviation. And during spring breaks and Christmas break and Easter break and things like that, I would actually rent one of those airplanes and share in expenses with other students to fly them back to the Pittsburgh area. And so, yeah, I was keeping active with cross country flying and, everything that you need to do to keep up with your skills.
That proficiency, I think, is so important. You can have the rating,
if
you're not proficient, that's dangerous.
Yeah, and even after I graduated and I was in practice, I would still spend a significant amount of time at the local airport teaching and flying. I always stayed involved with it. Always.
Where it still lies, if you're going to be not even a professional aviator, but if you're going to be just a private pilot, you've got to stay proficient. You've got to devote the time to it, so you can
have to
keep yourself and your family safe.
Have to.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now that we know all of that, we're going to kind of turn the corner a little bit and get maybe a little more serious here. I think during the course of our careers, we both saw, particularly in maybe the last 10 years, some significant signs of degradation to the industry beginning to happen. And then we began to see the rise of some significant medical tyranny beginning to happen when the pandemic was introduced to the world. In fact, we talked about this before. I received a career-ending ultimatum from my employer during that time, and you did too. So tell us a little bit about that story and how that career-ending thing happened for you. We'll talk a little bit more about the transition and things to follow later, which is fascinating. But how did your career as a pilot end their adulthood?
So, what happened was this thing called the COVID pandemic supposedly happened. And, I started seeing images on television of, people dropping dead in China and the fear porn just being pushed 24/7 and people wearing hazmat suits. And the next thing I see is people walking around in the airport with face masks on. And I'm thinking, this is not a good sign. Now, I had seen face masks on passengers before, and it was mainly a cultural thing. I saw it on a lot of people that were flying in and out of India and some people that were flying in and out of China. And I just figured maybe it was an air pollution thing. I didn't really know. But I knew through my medical training that wearing a device like that does not prevent the spread of any airborne illness. And it says so right on the box that the masks come in. And
it's not only that. You mentioned in one of the interviews that I saw you in, and I want to talk about this briefly here. I'd like you just for your medical background, be able to tell people about this because so many don't know. Not only does the face mask that we're talking about that we see most commonly not work for filtering out virus particles, in fact, it's worse than that. Why? Why is a face mask like that worse than not being able to stop the transmission of the virus particles?
Because it's designed to trap droplets, and that's exactly the problem. And so when you are forced to wear this thing for extended periods of time, which is what they were doing,
hours,
you're going to trap all kinds of stuff in the mask. You're going to be trapping virus particles that are stuck to droplets, bacteria, pollen, who knows what all else. And because they're trapped there, you're giving yourself the opportunity to continuously rebreathe that stuff. And there have been studies done on this that clearly show that when you wear these masks for an extended period of time, you are making yourself 13 times more likely to develop an upper respiratory infection of any kind.
Put your kids in school, for example.
Oh, God, that was just horrendous. And so, doctors and nurses, when they wear these devices, they're only on for a couple of hours when they're in the operating room. They're not on all day long. And they get proper training. They're trained to never touch them, and what's the first thing you see with a person wearing a mask? They're always constantly popping it, pulling it, playing with it. Well, when you do that, you actually aerosolize the virus particles. And now when they're aerosolized, they're basically weightless. They can float in a room for days. They can travel way beyond 6 feet. So, all of this ridiculousness about, separating yourself 6 feet from another is just
Stupid.
absolutely ridiculous. And, it's known now that you are going to breathe about 100 million various virus particles every single day, whether you are wearing a mask or not. That's just the way it is. It's nature. We're constantly exposed to these things. You can't stop it any more than you can stop ocean tides. It's nature. And so again, why do people wear the masks in operating rooms and first responders? It's to prevent the spraying of bodily fluids that happen in those types of situations where you get arteries that get nicked and bodily fluids start spraying around. You just don't want those getting in your mouth or in your nose, and you don't want to be slobbering into a person's open mouth. That is basically the reason for the medical mask. So what did they do? They forced people to wear a medical device. Oh, it's just a mask, they said. No, it's not just a mask. It is a medical device. And they had to get approval through the government to use these medical devices as an emergency use authorization. It's a medical device. And I warned my chief pilots about this. I'm like, seriously? You're going to make people put this thing on and sit in an aircraft coast to coast for a 5-hour flight?
Just real quick, did the airline companies actually go and seek that permission, or did they just say, "Oh, we're good"?
They didn't seek anything. They just followed the guidance that came out of the CDC. There was no testing done, no testing to see how this would affect the reaction times of a pilot in a cockpit. There were no tests done to see if this would affect the time it takes to evacuate an aircraft full of passengers with flight attendants wearing masks and trying to communicate with passengers.
What about oxygenation levels in flight crew?
Yeah. So, and that too, they never checked for that. They never checked to see the effects of hypoxia. And as I mentioned, when you're in an aircraft flying coast to coast for 5 hours, the cabin altitude is anywhere from 6,000 to 8,000 feet, and that depends on how tight the fuselage is. And the older these airplanes get, sometimes they get leaky, and sometimes you can hear the leaks as a passenger. If you ever hear a really loud squeal, that's one of the seals that's leaking just a little bit. It's not dangerous, but what happens is the cabin altitude creeps higher and higher, and so the older the airplanes get, now you've got an 8,000-foot cabin altitude, which is literally like being on the top of Pikes Peak. And so now you want to complicate that by putting on another device on their face that is restricting the amount of oxygen that's going to get into their body. Not a good idea. Plus, you're going to be putting it on people that should never be wearing these devices, people that have COPD, people that have asthma, children that are afraid to wear the mask, people that are claustrophobic. They never think about this type of thing. They just say, oh, it's a mandate. You have to do it.
Do you want to go from point A to point B? Put it on. I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for me, it was a safety thing, and also knowing that it doesn't do anything. And as far as stopping the spread of airborne illness. And so I was given the ultimatum, Brad, on a layover. I was on one of my favorite layovers. I was in Boston. I'll never forget it. I had 2 different calls from 2 different chief pilot offices. And they're like, we're getting reports from flight attendants that you're not compliant, you're not wearing the mask. Some passengers have written you up as well. And I said, that's absolutely correct. I am not wearing the mask, and I will not wear the mask. And I gave them the medical reasons why. And what they told me was, your reasoning is sound, and we believe you that it doesn't do anything. But corporate has made the decision that every employee will wear the mask as part of their uniform, and it is an optical thing. It's a visual thing. We want to convey to the public and to our traveling passengers that we're in this fight together. I said, well, I'm not doing it. It's all fake, and it's dangerous even. I will not do it. And he said, well, you can't work here anymore. And I said, well, I'll tell you what. Yeah, do you see my schedule? do you have it on your computer screen? See all those trips on there? He said, yeah. I said, take them off my line. I'm done. I'm on my last trip. And he said, you would really throw away your career over this? I said, absolutely, I would. This is something that I feel that strongly about. He's like, well, you're at the pinnacle of your career. You're getting ready to upgrade to the wide body aircraft. I said, I know, but I'm willing to walk away from that for my principles. I will not wear that mask. And that was it, Brett.
Yeah. So,
and
your situation was even prior to the shop mandates. So I walked away from my career because they wanted me to take the shot. And after seeing a lot of the things that you just mentioned was, people passing out, keeling over, listening to lots and lots of stories on the news about severe, sudden, and quick, even fatal reactions. And some of these fatalities happen within just minutes of people getting a shot.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much when.
And that's an absolute fact, Brett. And I got to tell your listening audience, there is something seriously wrong with our society when, according to the own CDC records, 1,150 people died the same day they got that shot. And this is in the United States. And some of those deaths happened in full view of people waiting in line to get theirs. And they still stayed in line.
What happened to that guy? That's not going to happen to me because I'm going to take the risk. And he wasn't lucky. And
you know how they got away with doing that? Because they scared people. They scared the daylights out of people, saying that if you come in contact with this virus, it will kill you. And the only way to protect yourself is with this shot that they're calling a vaccine. And what's in the shot? The worst part of the virus. That's
we
what's
can talk
in it.
about that here in a few minutes as well.
Why do people do that?
But I want to know, because of all these things that just happened, what we just talked about was kind of the beginning of a timeline. We'll put all this stuff started happen. So how did what happened to you and people like me and others that are in our field, how did that turn you into a medical freedom fighter? And what does that look like for you today?
Yeah, so I started speaking out immediately as soon as they let me go from the airline. I started speaking out at school board meetings and also county commissioner meetings, not only about the dangers of wearing a mask and how ridiculous it was, but also about the dangers of a vaccine. And I said, I can see signs that this is going to be mandated. And I said, this is something that we need to not do. It's against our basic rights of bodily autonomy. Everybody should have the right to decide whether they want to have a procedure like this done or not. And they need to be given informed consent, which means, you need to know what's in it and what the reactions can possibly be. And you need to have the right to refuse that. Now, all of those things that I just mentioned, Brett, are in the emergency use authorization that was given to both Pfizer and Moderna. It is in the emergency use authorization that all of these requirements must be met. You must tell the person this is experimental. You must tell the person that there are possible adverse reactions that can happen, including death, and you have the right to refuse it. And by refusing it, it should not affect your ability to continue to operate in your workplace, and it shouldn't affect your ability to get medical care. That's in the rules, Brett. And what happened? Exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite happened. The FAA, literally the day after emergency use authorization was given to Pfizer, which was on December the 11th, 2020, the FAA made the announcement that it is safe for all pilots and air traffic controllers to go out and get this shot and it will not affect their ability to hold their medical certificate, which is required for them to either be an air traffic controller or a pilot. And that goes directly against their guidance, Brett. We can talk about what the guidance is, but that goes directly against it. Why did that happen? We need to find out.
I totally remember when that came out, and I was just in absolute disbelief. Well, tell you what, we're going to go ahead and take another quick break here, and then we're going to start heading into some information about the U.S. Freedom Flyers, and then some other aspects of this that a lot of the audience may have heard about peripherally, just if they're just casually tuning into the news, but there's a lot more that people need to know. So we'll be right back.
Joining us now is someone who's fighting hard for one group affected by all this, and that's airline pilots. He's a pilot himself and a proud veteran, president of US Freedom Flyers, Josh Yoder. Josh, great to see you, and thank you for what you're doing here. Tell us about the situation with respect to airline pilots.
Yeah, Steve, thanks for having me on. You know, the organization U.S. Freedom Flyers was started in August of 2021 to stand up against the looming federal mandates. In large part, we had a tremendous amount of success, but there were certainly airlines that did fire their employees. And the amount of devastation that has been caused has been tremendous. I spoke just today, actually, with several pilots who have been fired, and their lives have been turned upside down. You know, some of them have lost their families, they've lost their homes, they've lost everything over something that was a complete lie. You know, the Biden administration lied to us. They illegally mandated an emergency use authorization drug, and the companies jumped on board.
Is there any sign, just in the area you're working on, that these pilots are going to be where do they stand? What are the airlines saying? Are they ashamed of what they did?
They're not ashamed. At least they're not publicly ashamed. And I can tell you that many of these people, no one has been reinstated to my knowledge. Many of the airlines did accept religious and medical exemptions, and that was only because we stood up in force and we said we're not going to tolerate this totalitarianism. But there were about 4 companies that did, in fact, fire their employees, and they're standing their ground on that issue, and they're not reinstating their employees. And I can tell you that it's caused tremendous damage. You know, we're seeing an incredible increase in mental health claims, suicides, and other issues among pilots. It's been quite devastating.
It's disgusting what they did. Is there any legal recourse? I mean, what can we do about this?
There certainly is legal recourse. Something that's been on the books, a law that's been on the books for years in the United States, says that it is illegal to mandate an emergency use authorization drug. And I think this is the thing that we really need to pull the attention to. What they did was in fact criminal. They broke the law when they did it, and there must be accountability. And that's what U.S. Freedom Flyers is really focused on, not only caring for the people who've been affected on a personal level, but also bring the litigation, now specifically going after the Federal Aviation Administration. Had they done their job, no pilot in this country would ever have been allowed to take an emergency use authorization drug. There's a major safety component there that was broken.
I found out that you were involved with the Freedom Flyers as well. And now, just recently, you've taken on a big new role with that organization. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I decided to take on the role as vice president of U.S. Freedom Flyers. And, the reason is because I feel that I have the communication skills to talk to not only people within the FAA, but people on government levels as well about how the rollout of this shot has significantly affected aviation safety. And I think the FAA is fully aware of this. In fact, they put out a SAFO, which stands for Safety Alert for Operators. They put this out in March of 2023, indicating that there was a significant uptick in aircraft incursions, which basically means aircraft getting too close to one another. And this could happen for a number of reasons. It could be brain fog on behalf of a controller, or it could be a pilot error. It could be fatigue. It could be a staffing issue. It could also be tied to the shot, because we know that the shot can cause adverse reactions, including brain fog and blood clotting, which can affect your ability to think. It can also cause strokes, seizures, things that you do not want happening to a pilot when they're in control of an aircraft.
I just remember I just remember at about that time, like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, when we all got sent home, That shot had not actually come out yet. It was starting to come out. They were starting to talk about it. And actually, at the time, I thought the mRNA concept was going to be pretty good. I was thinking about taking that shot.
Yeah.
And then, like we talked about before, we started seeing all of these problems beginning to happen. And, that's when my family and I opted out. But at about that time, I actually wanted to talk to my doctor that I'd had for, I think she'd been my general practitioner where I lived there probably for about 6 or 7 years. So I called her up on the phone one time and I said, so if I end up, getting this illness and I end up over there in the hospital, what's your treatment plan for me? She said, what we are going to do for you is put you in the ICU. We're going to intubate you and then we're going to give you remdesivir. And I already knew about that. And I thought, we never spoke again, basically.
Well,
never again.
That protocol that you just mentioned was a deadly protocol. It was definitely the wrong thing to do. You're forcing air into the lungs, which are already irritated, and you're just compounding the issue. And you're going to end up attracting a lot of excess fluid into the lungs, and it's going to be deadly. Unfortunately, that happens to a lot of people. So, you mentioned
while they were waiting for this to happen, you started talking about it too with some of the things about different symptoms like brain fog and different indicators, like runway incursions, other particular problems. I do remember, at one point there was an uptick that we began to notice in that mysterious single pilot accident. You can't really figure out what happened, even though you do the toxicologies and everything. Those are really hard to nail down unless the pilot, calls out, talks to air traffic control about, what they're experiencing. But you've got this single pilot accident, and then all of a sudden, nobody knows what to do about it.
Yeah, well, the same thing happened in the military. Literally, the month after that, SAFO came out from the FAA warning, all passenger-carrying airlines about this uptick in safety signal. Literally, the next month, General James McConville, who was Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, grounded all Army aviators for 1 month.
Yep.
And they did that because there were, as you said, some of these things are single pilot, operations that are happening. Well, there were crashes and people died and they couldn't figure out why. And so they thought maybe it was a training problem. So they just brought everything to a grinding halt. So they recognize that there's a problem there also. And so there is what looks to be a significant increase in pilot incapacitations at major airline carriers all over the world. We're seeing that because they're being reported in various substacks that are, publicly available.
Right.
One is Dr. William Mackus, that's up in Canada, who's kept a very good track record of pilot incapacitations.
That's
and so through U.S. Freedom Flyers, we have a FOIA request directly to the FAA, to their CAMI, it's called. It's the Civil Aerospace Medical Institute, where they keep track of pilot incapacitations. And we have asked for that database. We want to see all pilot incapacitations that have happened in the United States airspace. And I asked for this on Valentine's Day. And we're months down the road, and I have not gotten a response from them. And we're going to take a significant look at that data and see if there is a signal in there. We feel that there is, and then we need to talk to Congress about this. I would encourage, anyone listening to this, action steps to take. Number one, please join usfreedomflyers.org. You do not have to be a pilot. We are there to protect everyone, including the traveling public. So join usfreedomflyers.org. That way you'll be able to keep up on what we're doing on this front. And we plan to bring a lawsuit against the FAA to hold them accountable for what they've done, because pilots have died that should not have died, Brett. And I've got the data on this.
Mm-hmm.
I've tied pilot names to obituaries that, clearly show that they were pilots for these airlines, and they died young. They died before the normal retirement age of 65. Now, that does happen, but it doesn't happen with the frequency that started happening right after this shot rolled out in 2021. There was a 40% increase. That's not normal. So I'm telling you, there is a definite tie-in to this shot and early pilot deaths, and I feel that there is a tie-in also with pilot incapacitations. Now, how do we prove that? Well, we have to do what's called data collection. And, Brett, you were in the FAA. You know how it works. It's all about data collection. They have a huge data safety base called this SMS, Safety Management System. Everything goes into that database, and they're looking for signals. And mainly what they're tracking is, aircraft stuff, the parts, what happens to aircraft, any emergencies, engine failures, parts wearing out prematurely. But what are they not checking? Personnel. And they should be. They're not even keeping track of who got the shot, when they got it, and when their last one was, and did they get a booster shot or not. It's not part of a pilot's medical record, and it should be. Why? Because we know for a fact that one of the major adverse reactions of any of these mRNA shots, I don't care which one it is, all of them, it's myocarditis. And myocarditis is a hard safety line in the sand for pilots. If you're diagnosed with myocarditis, you cannot get a medical certificate, which means you cannot fly an airplane of any kind, even a small Cessna.
Well, Kevin, let me dig into that a little bit more because I totally agree with you on that one, and it kind of indicates a shift in the FAA's narrative. One thing that I learned quite a while ago, I guess shortly after I got out, and one of the actions that the FAA did that really set me off, I think, was a gigantic safety of flight mistake. At one point, I think probably in October of 22, and you'll know that even a little bit more than me, I'm sure, we had a change to the heart checks in the annual physical, the flight physical. I'll be putting up a slide over top of us here that's going to show for the audience what that PR interval is. And it's just one of the segments of the heartbeat before you get the big impulse that drives all the blood around. But one of the things that's interesting about that is that for decades, that PR interval was 200 milliseconds. And then you just mentioned it a while ago, pilots started getting myocarditis and other things that were symptomatic. And so they would go in for their annual physical, and lo and behold, for the first time in their entire lives, in their entire career, they flunked their physical because that PR interval, they didn't make it in time. They were extended beyond that for the requirement. And then pilots would go on long-term disability. So we've got pilots failing their flight physicals. We've got people going on long-term disability. And now the FAA is getting wind of this because all that's being reported up chain. And the FAA says, we have got to do something about this or the national airspace system is going to collapse. We're not going to have enough pilots because the companies, the federal government, contractors, everybody is making pilots get this shot, job or jab, or they're going to just lose those pilots. So what was your experience? And also we've got proof of that in the receipts, if you will, that Aerospace Medical Examiner Guide in 2022, it shows where they changed that wording from 200 milliseconds, boldface, 300 milliseconds. Talk to me about that.
So we really looked into that very deeply, Brett, and we did find evidence that they were talking about changing the PR interval and allowing pilots to go beyond that 0.2 well before COVID happened. They started talking about this in 2016 and 2017. But it wasn't in their manual. It wasn't in print in the manual. We're still trying to figure out why they were doing this back before 2021, but they didn't update the manual until October of 2022. They're giving us some kind of a story about, well, it was just a typographical error, blah, blah, blah. And their reasoning for extending the PR interval was because it was going to cause the pilot to go through extra testing that's extremely expensive, and we wanted them to save that cost. Okay, well, and they said, back in 2016, 2017, that there was no indication of extended PR intervals being associated with pilot incapacitations. Maybe that was true then, but is it true now? And that's what we're trying to find out, Brett. There's a way that we can tie in aircraft incapacitations with known heart issues in pilots. That database is available, and we're going to be able to do that, and we're going to nail this down for sure. So in the charts that you're going to show, Brett, I looked at the charts, and you've got a graph there of an EKG, and it does show the PR interval. And as you said, that's a delay time to get the blood from the upper chambers of the heart, which are the atria, into the lower chambers of the heart before the blood gets pumped out to the entire body through the left ventricle or to the lungs through the right ventricle. So that's a delay time. And as you said, it's been written in stone that the normal time is 0.12 to 0.2 seconds. Now, we do know that it can be normal for that PR interval to extend all the way out to 0.3, but it happens in pilots that are older because of an aging process. And it can also happen in younger pilots that are called, what's having something called high vagal tone, which is something that can be measured. But they're not doing any of this, Brett. And if you look at the AME guidance, it says, as long as there are no symptoms and the PR interval has extended to 0.3, you're okay to go. That's not safe. And the reason is because we now know that myocarditis can be something that extends the PR interval. It can be one thing. Exactly. Now, you can't look at an EKG and see the PR interval extended and say, oh, the pilot has myocarditis. No, you can't do that. You have to do additional testing. And so that's what we're saying. It's not safe right now just to say that because you have an extended PR interval up to 0.3, that the pilot is okay and good to go. No, there could be subclinical myocarditis that's hiding there. Now, the research has already been done on this. They did a study of over 1,500 athletes at college universities. These are young, healthy people, over 1,500 looking for myocarditis after they got the shot. And they found that about 2.3% of them did, and over half of those had completely asymptomatic conditions. They didn't even know they had it. So that's a problem, Brett. If those facts that they developed and they researched already are true in young athletes, it could also be true in pilots. But we don't know.
Well, okay. So, Kevin, if I'm a pilot with subclinical myocarditis, and let's say my heart check there on my flight physical was like 275 milliseconds, I don't even know I'm sick.
Right.
What could happen to me?
Well, you could have sudden heart failure. And this is known because when you get into what's called a flight or fight response, which we kind of talked about earlier, where we said that aviation is hours and hours and hours of boredom interspersed with a few seconds of stark terror. When you get that surprise, in the cockpit, and your adrenaline kicks in, and that calls for an increased heart rate, and it also causes an increase in blood pressure. A number of things start happening in the heart, and if you have subclinical myocarditis, you could have areas in the heart that are called ectopic foci, and these are like their own little pacemakers that are abnormally in the heart. Everybody knows the heart has a pacemaker. It's called the sinoatrial node. It's up in the atrium. That's what normally will pace the rhythm of your heart. But if you've got myocarditis, you can have these little independent pacemaker areas, and that can be a problem because it can send the heart into what's called either an atrial or a ventricular fibrillation. Well, what's that mean? It means that the heart is still beating, but it's basically twitching. It's not pumping the blood. And within a few seconds, you will lose consciousness. And if that heart is not shocked back into proper rhythm with an emergency device that's called an automatic external defibrillator, which is required to be on all passenger aircraft now, that person will die. And I believe we've had this happen a couple of times now in the cockpit. We had one pilot that I know of that died in the cockpit. Was it a result of the shot? No way to know because they didn't do an autopsy. Yeah. But it's entirely possible, and it's happened.
And if you extend that search beyond America, and you look at some of the airlines from other countries, you can see that same thing happening. Is the quote unexplained
worldwide
death
we had
of the pilot in the cockpit.
Worldwide in 1 week's time, and this was back in August of 2023. We had 3 pilots die while they were on duty at work. 3 of them. That's highly unusual. So what could happen if you get one of these episodes, say in a critical phase of flight, like takeoff or landing? What's the danger that could happen there? Well, we're trained for this, Brett. All pilots are trained for this. Right. It's called emergency.
Just incapacitated crew.
Exactly, and we're trained to handle that. The problem is if both pilots have subclinical myocarditis and the other pilot overreacts, you could have the possibility of both pilots, losing consciousness at a critical phase of flight. Now, I admit that that's going to be extremely rare, but what I alluded to earlier in the program was that seizures are also an adverse effect of this shot. And I believe that that's going to be more of a danger to safety of flight. And the reason I say that is because when you get what's called a tonic seizure, it's violent. And
you'll take a look just before you go on. If people have seen video of athletes on playing fields going into that kind of a seizure, you're right. That's violent, and they have some severe reactions. So go ahead.
There was an investigation into pilot incapacitations that was done from 2009 to 2015, and they did find one instance of a pilot, the captain, having a seizure during the landing phase of flight. And as I said, it's extremely violent. The body goes rigid, and what happened was the captain's leg fully extended and pushed the rudder all the way to the floor, and the aircraft left the runway and stopped quickly. No other aircraft was hit and no one was injured, but still, you can see how violent of a reaction it is. Now, what I'm saying is, it happens with such strength and force that in this particular pilot that it happened to, the shoulder was broken, and also they got a lumbar fracture from this, a lumbar compression fracture. That's how violent this is. Now, here's the problem, Brett. Everybody knows that's a pilot that's listening to this program right now, knows that the rudder pedals are connected between the captain and the first officer. When one set of pedals moves, the other moves as well, because they are connected by cables. So if one of those rudder pedals gets pushed fully to the floor and it's unexpected, and that person, their leg is locked against the seat, there is no way that the other pilot is going to be able to put in an opposite flight control to overcome that. Even with the ailerons, it cannot be done. We've lost a couple of aircraft over this already. One happened at U.S. Air. It happened to U.S. Air Flight 427 on September the 8th, 1994, landing at the Pittsburgh International Airport. They were
Wow.
on final approach, and everything was fine. And all of a sudden, the aircraft spun into the ground. And what they found was that there was a full rudder input that was put in by one of the pilots, or maybe it was a servo failure that caused the rudder to fully, be deployed. And again, you cannot overcome that even with ailerons. And so you can look, you can't. And the aircraft will stall and spin into the ground. And that's what happened. And it was a horrific accident. And it happened again. This was American Airlines Flight 587 that took off out of the JFK airport on November the 12th of 2001. And it was a wide-body aircraft, an A300, big jet. And the first officer overreacted to turbulence encounter and put in a full rudder input, and it caused the aircraft to crash. And so, you remember that. So these are instances where this has happened before. And what I'm saying is, if we have a pilot that has a tonic seizure and puts a full unexpected flight control input, and the other pilot cannot overcome it, we're going to have a disaster. Now, we had a very, very close call, and this just happened in November of this past year. It was a flight coming in from from Paris, landing in Philadelphia. It was American Airlines Flight 755, another big aircraft, a Boeing 787. And I wrote about this in my Substack. And they were on final approach. They were either just outside the final approach fix or very close to it. And the first officer, who was the flying pilot, had a complete tonic seizure that I'm talking about, where the entire body went completely stiff.
Right.
His arms went above his head and all the way back. And luckily, his feet were not on the rudder pedals and slid underneath the rudder pedals. Now, this was an international flight, so they had the relief officer on the jump seat, and the relief pilot was able to pull that incapacitated pilot out of the seat, and he was able to jump into the seat, and they continued the flight, and they landed safely. Nobody in the back even knew that this happened. The autopilot didn't even go off. Nothing bad happened, but that was a close call. So these are all safety signals. So what I'm saying is we need to start testing pilots right now to see if they've got clotting issues, because seizure like that is caused from something that has gone wrong in the brain tissue. That can happen from a clotting issue. It can also happen from a tumor. And we now know that these shots can be tied to aggressive tumors and even glioblastomas in the brain. It's all there. So what I'm saying is there's enough signals that we should be having the FAA take a closer look at pilots when they get their flight physicals, and it's all for safety. We're headed for a disaster, unfortunately, and you know this as well as I do, Brett. Some of the major changes that have happened in aviation that are safety related are written in blood. What do I mean by that? It came from a horrific accident. Remember the crash of the perfectly normal wide body L-1011 that crashed in the Everglades? That was a Eastern Airlines pilot. All three pilots were distracted because of a light in the cockpit, and they didn't realize that the aircraft was slowly descending and it crashed into the Everglades. So as a result of that, it's a requirement for all passenger aircraft to have an emergency alerting device in the cockpit, and it's called the ground proximity warning system. When you get close to the ground, that thing yells at you. So, it's written in blood.
That's what we said in the Air Force, too. We said the reason we got this new emergency procedures checklist item is because somebody died.
Exactly.
Because something
Exactly.
happened in one of his
So,
fighters, and now we have a
what
new
I don't
checklist.
want to see happen is we lost an airplane because a pilot had a seizure because they may have gotten this shot. I don't want to ever see that happen.
Yeah, me neither. I agree with that 100%. So the folks that are watching are probably going, oh my goodness, what is going on in the aviation industry? Do I or don't I want to be a pilot? I think I want to be a pilot because, listen, what we're talking about here is not a very high frequency of
No,
occurrence.
it's not.
So the risk of occurrence is
No,
small.
very small.
And if you look at the millions of hours that commercial aviation has flown accident-free, those are good odds for you. And if you wanted to be a pilot, I will show some information now about what it actually takes to become an air transport pilot. These are pretty significant requirements. So you may be surprised, but you've got to start somewhere.
Here's a question for you. Want to fly the big iron? What are the requirements a pilot needs to meet to earn the Airline Transport Pilot ATP certification? Answer, there's tons of them. First, to be eligible for the certificate, a pilot must 1, be of good moral character, 2, be 23 years old, 3, hold a commercial license and instrument rating, 4, pass the ATP written and practical tests, and 5, meet the minimum flight hour requirements per 14 CFR Part 61, and that's 1,500 hours. People, you can do this. Once I had the experience I needed for the rating, I scheduled a week off of work and scheduled an ATP class. I got a hotel near the airport, showed up on Monday morning to start class. The weather and the airplane cooperated, and I had my rating by lunchtime Friday.
All right, come to the folks who just learned about what it takes to become an air transport pilot, and those are daunting requirements. But I will tell you from my personal experience that it is worth it. I've got 10 separate type ratings, and I've been using my ATP license for 20 years, and it is worth every bit of studying that I ever did.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Yeah.
Well, this next block I'm going to call notes, warnings, and cautions. And one of the things about notes, warnings, and cautions is those are some of the most important parts of our flight manuals because they tell us some of the things that could go wrong with our planes, and in particular, they can tell us what we need to do to fix that.
Right.
And in the case of a passenger airliner, the folks in the back most likely blissfully ignorant about what has been going on up in the front.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why I think we should never even consider not having 2 pilots up front. I know there's some talk about having 1 pilot with a virtual co-pilot, and that virtual co-pilot may be helping with 10 other airplanes. I think that's a bad idea. But this is what you and I were just talking about. What if you have that seizure from myocarditis?
Yeah,
you're all by yourself.
It's a very bad idea. They're already kind of experimenting around with a little bit with tracking freight haulers, like I used to do years ago to build time. They're looking for safety signals that may or may not be occurring with single pilot operations that are carrying freight. These are smaller aircraft. Before we continue into this scary segment, I just want to remind everybody that flying is still inherently safe. It's very safe, and we want to keep it that way. And U.S. Freedom Flyers, we are dedicated to being really the only FAA watchdog right now that is focused on pilot health and medical standards and reporting on these things to keep flying safe. So that's our goal. That's our mission.
We're buried right now in our country with a variety of red flags that we're seeing, not only in the aviation industry, but also in the culture at large. And as aviation professionals in the National Aerospace System, that's otherwise known as the NAS, a lot of folks are aware that some things are going on. They may have seen some things in the news, regardless of your ideology. You may have seen some things that are happening. The first red flag that I'd like to talk about now with you, Captain Doctor, is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
as it's commonly called DEI, like I said. But first, just some definitions so that everybody knows, where we're coming from. I'll go ahead and give a couple of those. Diversity, I mean, that makes sense. It's the presence of a variety of people, ideas, thoughts in the workforce. Some of those attributes, they could be sex, age, religion, country of origin, even opinions, is some of the things that we can talk about with diversity. Fine. I'm going to skip equity and we'll come back to that because that's where I think this conversation really needs to head next. But then is inclusion, and inclusion is fine. That's a corporate experience where everybody feels included, their voice matters, and they just feel pretty much like they're fully integrated into the business, into the company, and that's fine too. But where I take issue with, particularly the aviation field, is equity. And one of the most common definitions of equity in this case is that you get equal outcomes in a given situation for whoever enters that situation. Let's keep in the back of your mind for now that situation might be a person who wants to enter pilot training. And we're not talking about experience here. We're talking about at the end of the pilot training pipeline where everybody gets the same outcome. So here's what we need to figure out now. That I'm convinced that DEI, at least in the aviation industry, there's a good chance that if you follow DEI principles exclusively, we could cause some fatalities. How do you see that happening, Kevin, from the captain's chair?
Well, I agree with you 100%, Brett. And, we're already seeing some signs of this. There was just a testimony that was done in Washington, D.C., where some whistleblowers came forward.
Right.
These people, work for the Boeing Corporation. And so the FAA is aware of this. And, for the longest time, the FAA didn't have any leadership after this COVID nonsense.
Yeah.
Because
right.
The administrator resigned, and they had a couple of people that President Biden had appointed. This is an appointed position, by the way. And so just recently, the new administrator was appointed, and his name is Michael Whitaker. And, they really put him on the hot seat, and they demanded answers for these safety signals that are happening in aviation. They're wanting to know what is going on here. And, Michael Whitaker admitted that the FAA did drop the ball, and they need to really pay close attention to what's going on with aircraft manufacturing, particularly. And he talked specifically about the culture that's involved. And this definitely has to do with DEI. These companies are trying to check boxes and put people into molds that really can't be done if you want to have a safe environment for the traveling public. And this goes in all aspects of aviation, not only the people who put these airplanes together, but the people who do the final testing on these products, the people that inspect the products, the parts pipelines of where these parts are even coming from, because we know that recently there was an incident found where bogus parts even got installed in aircraft. And, as a captain, my focus is on operating a flight as safely as possible. And, that's a buzzword always in the aviation industry. Safety is our primary concern, and it is. But in order to have this safety, you've got to look at all aspects, including this concept of DEI. And I agree with you, Brett. DEI can work in some corporate environments, but I don't believe it fits well in aviation. It just doesn't fit.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But here's a practical example of that. If you're looking for an equal outcome, let's say you're in a simulator program at one of the major airlines, and you're trying to accomplish a syllabus, and that syllabus has been designed to get you from day one of school to the graduation exercise, and after that graduation exercise, you're certified in the 73900, for example. So if you've got a certain amount of money to spend on that training program, you've got a certain amount of hours that you can spend in the simulator, granted, a couple of extra cents maybe built in case you're struggling a little bit with something, and that's normal. But if you take somebody without a whole lot of experience, training, things like that would make them more highly qualified, you don't have the money to put on, double the amount of simulators to get that person through the program.
Right.
And besides, if you did do that, then you have somebody on the other end that still wouldn't have the experience that's needed, like we talked about, in the first segment of the program today, where it's a lot more than just learning how to, work flight controls, operate all the buttons. You've got to have the experience to go along with it.
It's
You're
a lot.
not going to get that with, you're not going to get that with an equity program.
No, and
you feel the same way?
It's called buying your ticket. It's called buying your way in. And
exactly.
You can buy the techniques that are required to get the certificates to have you operate an aircraft of this size, but you cannot buy the experience. Can't buy it. You got to get out there and get it on your own. And that's what I'm saying here. We need to keep it safe. Get people that are highly qualified. Hire them based on demonstrated ability and skills and experience, not by checking boxes.
That's what it's all about. I agree with that 100%. So the next red flag that I'm seeing, and you alluded to it just a few seconds ago, was the death of a whistleblower. This guy was given testimony.
He was.
And then, right during a break, and he'd already said, I'm not suicidal, and he goes out and eventually he's found in his truck with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So what do we think about death of a whistleblower and all the other whistleblowers that are coming forth about some of the manufacturing processes that are going on?
Yeah, so it takes a lot of courage to come forward as a whistleblower, and some of these whistleblowers have already testified that they've gotten death threats, and that's very concerning. So what are we what are we looking for in terms of corporate culture here? I mean, are we just trying to improve the bottom line, or are we truly interested in producing a fully safe product? Right now, it looks like they're more interested in the bottom line. How many aircraft can we get out there for the cheapest amount of production costs? That doesn't bode well for safety in my mind.
And this is that kind of self-defeating too, because if you take that approach over the long term, then all of a sudden a few bad things start to happen, and the FAA comes in and shuts down your production line. So what did that get you?
Yeah, well, some of the bad things that have happened, and the new FAA administrator admitted that they gave some of these aircraft manufacturers self-policing authority, self-government. Self-governance. You can't do that. You've got to have
even self-reporting.
Yeah, you've got to have outside eyes looking at this constantly, and that's expensive. And but it's something that needs to be done to make sure that we continue to have the safest national aerospace system in the world.
Yeah, I agree. But of course, there's more. It's not just the whistleblowing that's been going on. It's not just DEI in the aviation workplace. But now we're seeing, as it's been a couple of years now, since the mass vaccination took place, so-called vaccination. But we're now beginning to see a lot of big increase in excess deaths over time. And that's happening in all countries, particularly the ones, where the vaccine was enforced more often. So, and even in fact, in light of that, other countries, including the U.S., are emphasizing, and suggesting more and more boosters. So
Yeah.
I find that interesting. What in the way of congressional testimony have you given, and what can you talk to us about that particular aspect?
Well, I haven't given any congressional testimony yet, but I do plan to. And so we need to call for immediate cessation of all mRNA injections that go into flight crews. And I'll give you a very easy biological explanation for why that is. The delivery systems that they're using in this mRNA technology is something that's called a lipid nanoparticle. And basically it's a large fat bubble. Now, inside that larger fat bubble, there are smaller fat bubbles. And those are proprietary. Moderna has theirs, and Pfizer has theirs. But inside those proprietary fat bubbles, which are toxic, by the way, they are known to be toxic. And if you look them up, they're not even supposed to be used in veterinary medicine. They're that toxic. But they got into these shots because of the emergency use authorization. So anyway, the messenger RNA that is inside these little fat bubbles, when it gets released into the cytoplasm of the cell, it has the instructions to make a protein. It's a foreign protein. Well, any cells that are making foreign proteins are going to be attacked by your immune system. That's just how it's designed to work. And so if you're injecting something into the body to make foreign proteins on purpose, those cells are going to be attacked and they're going to be destroyed. Now, this can happen in localized areas of the body. For example, if it happens in the heart musculature, you're going to end up with myocarditis. Could be subclinical myocarditis. Could be something that could result in sudden cardiac failure. Okay? Or it can happen all over the body. And that's called multi-inflammatory syndrome because it can affect all tissues of the body. And the reason, Brett, is because of the delivery system that they're using. That bigger lipid nanoparticle that I talked about is non-toxic. It's made of normal body fats. It's made out of cholesterol, and the other one is DSPC. That's the same stuff that your body cells are made of. And it was designed that way so that it would literally go everywhere. And it crosses the blood-brain barrier. And literally any cell that these bigger lipid nanoparticles bump into, they will merge. And that allows the smaller lipid nanoparticles to get inside of the cytoplasm. And when those smaller lipid nanoparticles dissolve, which is what they're designed to do, they're designed to dissolve under certain pH conditions. That's the acidity of your cell. The mRNA gets released and it starts making this foreign protein. So all of this mRNA technology, all of it is going to be making what are called, I call them bioactive proteins. And what do I mean by that? Well, a bioactive protein is one that when it gets made and released from the cell and gets into your blood or your lymph, it is going to attach to cellular receptors. It's not going to be willingly taken in by cells. It attaches to cellular receptors. So we're talking about proteins here, okay? And these aren't like proteins that you eat or proteins that your body is making and releasing all of the time that are used for other purposes. No, those are willingly taken in by cells. But not these proteins. These proteins are made by this synthetic messenger RNA. They are bioactive. They are going to attach to cellular receptors. Anytime something attaches to a cellular receptor, your immune system is going to attack and destroy those cells. So it results in pathology. And it results in pathology that sometimes happens quickly or sometimes can happen over a number of years. And I think that's where we are right now, Brett. I think we're starting to just see the fallout of this. And we're seeing it in aviation, particularly in the increased level of pilots going out on long-term disabilities for whatever reason. They're getting cancers, they're getting neurological problems, They're having vascular issues. And these are things that are sneaking up on pilots. And it's taking a long time for some of these things to show up, but they are showing up in greater and greater numbers.
Exactly.
And you know, if we allow this stuff to continue to go into flight crews, then we're going to continue to have the problem. And the biggest problem, and you mentioned it, is the booster shot, because we now know that the more booster shots you get, the greater your chances are of having what's called an IgG shift, an immunoglobulin shift that happens in your body. And basically what that does is it tells your immune system to stand down. It just stands down. It doesn't even attack the viruses that are going to come through and the bacteria. And that's why people are more susceptible to getting chronic illnesses now. This is
so the more booster shots you get, the worse your immunology is, and your immune system is basically non-functional after several of those.
You're making your immune system weaker over time, is what you're doing.
Every shot.
And it also targets your immune system to look for the wrong thing. You're injecting something to make a protein, and it makes lots and lots of that protein. I mean, billions of these little protein particles start floating around, and your immune system will make antibodies against that. That's what your immune system is designed to do. It makes antibodies against that foreign protein. Well, you're injecting a foreign protein that doesn't even exist anymore. It's outdated. So it's training your immune system to look for the wrong thing. It's looking for what you're injecting. It's not looking for what actually exists. And people don't get that. They need to understand that. Let me give you another little philosophical tidbit to think about.
You bet.
Antibodies are very powerful things. They are. They can save your life. For example, if you're bitten by a rattlesnake, okay, you go to the hospital, and what do? They inject you with anti-venom. Anti-venom is antibodies. That's what they are. Where did they get those antibodies? They got those antibodies from an animal that was bitten by a rattlesnake and developed perfect antibodies against rattlesnake venom. All of it, all parts of the venom, all of it. But it's a perfect antibody because it came from an animal that experienced the entire thing. Same thing with rabies. Okay, if you're bitten by an animal that has a rabies infection, the first thing they do is they put rabies antibodies in you that they got from an animal that experienced the rabies virus. All of it, the whole thing. So yes, antibodies are a very powerful thing, and they can save your life. But I will tell you, and this is from the training and the research that I've done, the only way that you can get that kind of an antibody is by experiencing a natural infection. It has to come in your body in a natural way through the barrier that separates the inside of you from the outside. It's called the epithelial barrier. And by doing so, when your body experiences that, it memorizes the entire thing, whatever it is, the whole bacteria, all parts of it, the whole virus, all parts of it, so that if any part of that virus or bacteria changes in the future, your immune memory still has enough there to recognize the new variant, and it keeps you protected. That's what immunity is. But what are we doing with this technology? We're injecting something through the barrier. We're ignoring the barrier. And we're telling the immune system to focus on just this one little part of it, not the whole thing. And by doing so, you're retraining your immune system, and it's not able to see the other things that are out there.
So you're not only
not protecting against what you wanted to protect against, so you thought, but you're also destroying your immune system so that everything else goes bad.
Everything else can get through as well, because you're retraining and focusing your immune system on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And why is this happening? Because you're injecting this platform that creates, as I said, billions and billions of these suboptimal antibodies.
Yeah.
That's not a natural thing to do. We should not be doing this. And
we're totally on the wrong vector in that regard.
We are,
in my opinion.
And so we got to
go ahead.
We got to stop these injections from going into all flight crews. Looking forward.
I think you're right. And I would think that the freedom flyers would be able to put out the word and just help as many flight crews as possible do this.
Yeah,
there is hope. We've got to get our flight crews well. I think we've been talking for many minutes here about some of the bad things that are happening with respect to the so-called vaccine, but treatments are available. So we've got to get our flight crews, we've got to get our flight attendants, the wrench tuners, air traffic controllers, anybody that's been affected in the aviation industry by this gene therapy. We've got to get them fixed. And so, what steps can we take, to fix this horribleness? I think that we could talk to people a lot. We could keep telling them. This has been a fascinating program for people to learn a lot about this who may not have known it. But at some point, they have to take action. So maybe what can you tell me about the spike protein removers that are coming up in some of the news, and maybe even address unvaxxed blood banks? Some of the things that I've been seeing a lot of stories about lately, they're going to be able to help people, because it's not all blame and doom. There is help.
Yeah, there is help. And, there are protocols that are available right now to help you to detox and remove these spike proteins, they're called, which is what the mRNA is making inside of your body. Right. And so some of these products are natural products that you can get, at any health food store. And this includes a combination of nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin. And so those things taken together can significantly affect the amount of spike protein that's in your body. It can actually help to start remove it over time.
Good to know.
Yeah, another thing you can do is change your diet so that you stop the proteins from attaching to cellular receptors, as I talked about. And if you eat a diet that's high in polyphenols, and you can look that up on the internet while we still have it. Give me a list of foods that are high in polyphenols. If you eat a lot of those foods, what it does is it tends to tame down the receptors that will accept the spike protein, and you'll start to feel better just by changing your diet. There are other things that people are investigating right now, including hyperbaric oxygen therapies.
I've heard that.
Yep. Red light therapies. Fasting is another avenue of approach, and that's the one that anybody can try, and it's completely safe. You put yourself on a 3-day water fast, and it forces your body into what's called autophagy, which basically turns your cells, instead of manufacturing proteins, it turns them into a protein clean-out service, where it starts removing proteins that don't belong there. And so that's another avenue of approach that you can do. Now, I mentioned U.S. Freedom Flyers for people to consider joining, because we do have a way to connect people that have vaccine injuries to medical services that we have found and we have investigated, and they have protocols that are definitely showing improvement. And so we can make connections with people directly to medical service providers. Some of these providers you would have to visit in person. Others can work with you through telemedicine. But again, there is help available, and that's the good news. Yeah, that's the good news.
That's good to know because, as recently as a year and a half ago, that was not such a big deal. It was like people are searching, trying to
Yeah.
find something they can do. And we can actually, maybe get some people back into the cockpit, that
Right.
may have had some problems.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a fantastic goal.
Yeah, and so I'm glad you brought that up because years ago they used to say that myocarditis was irreversible and
Yeah.
there's
I
permanent
remember that.
damage. Now, I will tell you that if you have myocarditis for an extended period of time and it affects the vasculature of the heart muscle so that you start to get tissue death, which is called necrosis, that's going to leave scar tissue, and that is definitely a permanent thing. But if you, number one, don't ever get a booster shot, just stop putting this stuff into your body
Yes.
and start doing some things that have been known to reverse myocarditis. And U.S. Freedom Flyers can definitely put you in contact with some people that can help you do that. And then, we'll get you back into the cockpit. And we've had several instances now where we've got pilots that have been diagnosed with myocarditis, clearly diagnosed because of imaging that was done either through MRI, which is the gold standard for diagnosing myocarditis, or echocardiograms, definitely showing swelling of the heart tissue. And that has been reversed. And we've got, these pilots are back to flying. And that's encouraging. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that is super encouraging, and that is some good news.
Yeah.
Well, we know that we can help the flight crews. What are we going to do? And this is almost a rhetorical question, except for a couple of aspects. What are we going to do to help the National Airspace System?
Yeah,
there are some jobs that actually need the most highly qualified people available, like pilots, your brain surgeon, Tier 1 special operators. They need to be the best that we could get. How are we going to fix the NAS?
Well, people need to write their Congress people, their representatives in Congress, and tell them that they're aware of these problems, and there seems to be some safety signals that are showing up in the National Airspace System, and we'd like to have some hearings to investigate and find out why this happened and what we can do to prevent these things from ever happening again. So it's going to have to come from within the people. It's going to have to be a grounds up thing. It really can't be top down. You could put another different person in the top, but I mean they can only do so much. There's going to have to be an uprising from the general public in this regard to make a meaning.
I think, the more we take time to educate the public is how that's going to happen. So I think, interviews and discussions like this, as soon as people begin to understand what is actually going on.
Yeah, well, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing right now, Brett. And I really appreciate the opportunity, to talk about these things because it's all education. The more people know about what's really going on, the smarter they become, and they're not going to be fooled the next time because believe me, they will try this again. They will.
Yeah. It's coming down the pipe. Well, I tell you what, Kevin, it has been an absolute honor having you on the show today, because I think the fact that we have an airline captain on the one hand and we have a doctor on the other hand, what a great mix, that is of brilliance, to have to discuss it, to be in leadership, even after you've left the cockpit, and probably even in a greater capacity than we've had before. Yeah. So I have a feeling, because I wanted to use, this interview as kind of a summary, stake in the ground of where we are at this stage in our country with all that's going on, with all the aspects that we've talked about with injuries, with policies. So I got a feel that over the course of the next few years, we're going to be referring back to this episode a lot, just to see where we were.
Well, we were, and the changes that are going to happen, meaningful changes, and they will happen. They have to happen.
I agree with that. Well, sir, you are cleared off. Frequency change is approved, and it's been
All right.
a real honor having you here on Jet Jockeys.
Thank you
Thanks a
so
lot.
much. All right. Bye now.